Hello everyone and welcome to Training Tuesday, week 3. Don't worry, we're not starting just yet, we're just going through some of the kind of bits that happened last week. So Carolyn, how did you find last week?
Yeah, it was good fun. Yeah, I enjoyed it. We got lots of interaction and tips from the audience, which also really helps everyone because you guys are all practitioners doing this all day, every day. So
Yeah.
it's great to get their input.
So just to recap, as it were, what was last week? What did we cover?
So last week was about attracting and retaining the talent in the contact centre. So we went through quite a lot in terms of tips and techniques for getting that whole selection and recruitment process correctly, and we talked about the psychological contract, so kind of the terms and conditions that get formed in people's heads through that recruitment process, and why it's so important to make sure that we are getting that psychological contract correct and helping to shape that. So we talked about examples of, kind of where advisors have been interviewed in a nice building and then actually been put to work in a not so nice building, and just things about, making sure they're clear about what a contact centre looks like and sounds like. And if they've never been in one before, it can be a bit overwhelming when you first walk into that environment. So yeah, being really clear up front is important. And then we looked at some of the strategies for how we retain our talent, and we talked about kind of promoting people from within and making sure they're getting regular training and support, and that it's not just kind of passive listening, which a lot of induction training can be, which is quite boring and is not the kind of best way in which people take in information. So you've got to be interactive. And we talked about communicating with the team effectively as well, so lots of tips of daily huddles and kind of more interactive team meetings and ways in which we can do that, which is good.
Yeah, I mean, we covered to start with what recruitment mistakes do you think contact centres make? What do you think of some of the ones that you would say?
Or going back through kind of some of the stuff we went through last week, certainly not doing a thorough enough interview process. So I would always look at the CVs myself as a manager, rather than kind of having either a recruitment agency or a HR function decide who it is that they're going to send to me for interview, because I've had so many days of my life wasted that I will never get back from sitting down and thinking, yeah, I'm going to do some good interviews today, and then the quality of what's been put in front of me has just not been right, or the skills, the fit's not been right. And so I would look at CVs myself, and I would also do some telephone interviews myself as well, because I want to know what they sound like on the phone, because that's going to be one of the main important things, unless I'm recruiting for an email agent or a chat agent, in which case I want to have an email conversation with them, or I want to have a sample live chat with them before I have an interview. So yeah, some of the things we talked about are not kind of recruiting and selecting thoroughly enough. We talked about, sometimes it's more accurate just to pull someone in off the street than it is just to do an interview, because it's so one-dimensional. And I think someone said at the time in the chat room that they're doing assessment centres, and that's the kind of most accurate way we have. Nothing is fail-proof, but the more ways in which we can test and experiment and put them in situations, the fuller and more rounded picture we get. We talked about competency-based interviewing as well, so asking predictive questions based on the competencies that we're looking for, so that somebody doesn't just give a textbook answer of what they should do or think they would do. We want to know, what have you done in the past when you've had that sort of situation, because that gives me a good idea of what you would do again in the future. So we talked about questions like, how can you calm down an angry caller, versus give me an example of a time when you've calmed down an angry person, what did you do? So that's kind of raising the bar on the quality of the questioning. And we talked a lot about exit interviews, and the failure to do exit interviews is missing a massive opportunity to gather some really good information. So it
Yeah,
was,
I think somebody wrote, we also ask staff to complete a questionnaire twice a year to identify areas of improvement needed, which I really liked.
yeah,
It's that constant improving, making sure that your staff are, happy, and how can you make, the call centre even better for them.
definitely. Yeah, I think I was talking about, quite often when we go in as consultants and work with clients, one of the things we'll do is focus groups with advisors because they have got such a wealth of information at their fingertips that quite often is missed and overlooked. And when we go back and tell the kind of heads of contact centre and the board all these recommendations, and they're like, wow, that's great. It's like, well, your advisors can just tell you. So yeah, definitely kind of questionnaires or focus groups, but the more two-way communication you can do, the better, definitely.
I suppose like having a feedback box, whether it's anonymous or not, would help as well.
Yeah, yeah, and it's just with those sorts of processes, they sometimes get a bad reputation if people don't get back to them when the suggestion isn't accepted, because then I think people just wonder what's happened to it and why it's not been listened to, and then they get disillusioned, and then people stop bothering to kind of participate. So anything with these opinion surveys and questions and suggestion boxes is great, but you've got to close that loop and keep going back to them with what impact that has had or why we didn't do what they suggested, so that they don't lose heart in that process, really.
Would you bring it up in a team meeting or?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So we were talking about team meetings. Definitely taking ownership for the suggestions that they put forward is a key part of the manager's role, and being well connected and networked as a manager yourself in your organisation to allow you to know how to progress these suggestions can be really important. And then that you can go back and give that feedback next time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So an important question that I thought I'd bring up again was someone asked, would you count staff moving to another department in your attrition rate? I know that you answered it, but just to recap.
I'm a massive fan of people moving from the contact centre into other parts of the organisation. So for me, that's wanted attrition. Whereas when they leave and they go somewhere else, that's, unless they're a monkey, that's unwanted attrition. Some of your monkeys, you're like, yay, get the bunting out, they've gone. So you might not want to count that in your attrition score either. But it's the unwanted attrition really that I want to be measuring and monitoring, because that's costing me money to recruit and replace and retrain. And so although it costs me when somebody goes into another department, that department's made a saving for the fact that we've recruited from within, and that person has already had the corporate induction and already understands the business and the customers and all of that. So no, I wouldn't. But you can skin a rabbit many ways, and it's like politicians and their figures. You can kind of manipulate them and calculate it however best suits you. But I wouldn't use that. I would think that that's what I'm trying to achieve as much as possible, is use the contact centre to breed talent for the rest of the business.
Yeah. So final question. We asked how to be the team leader everyone wants to work for. What would you say?
Well, we got some good ideas on that as well, didn't we? I think in the chat room, and
Yeah.
I kind of cheated a little bit and talked about kind of making sure that you're doing communication really well with your team, and that that you are really getting to know them as an individual, and you are not just kind of walking through the floor and sitting on your PC and getting on with your work, but that you are taking a genuine interest and showing genuine concern, and that you're very authentic as a leader in the way in which you interact with your team. Some of the things, but we also talked about having good self-esteem yourself as a leader. So we talked about fitting your own oxygen mask before helping anybody else. So yeah, I think a couple of people joined this program wanting to work on their confidence as a leader. So I'm hoping that that's starting to help now. It'd be good to get some feedback on that perhaps today, because we're kind of around the halfway point. So if we could sort of think about what's working well and what people might need further help in, then we can tailor that as well as we're going through.
Fab. Okay, well, we've reached the top of the hour, so welcome everyone who's just joined us. We've just been doing a quick review of what we were talking about yesterday. Dear oh dear. Just to go through a bit of quick housekeeping, remember that you can download the presentation slides in the top right-hand corner. The chat log, so everything discussed in the chat room can be downloaded with the down arrow, and if you want to make the PowerPoint bigger with the slides on and everything, there's a big play button. So Carolyn, what's happening week 3?
Yeah, well, before we kind of dig into too much to do with the week 3, it'd be good just to kind of have a look back and have a think about what reflections and results we've had. We were just talking about that now. So we're on week 3. And you've had some time, hopefully, to reflect on what we've covered and to have a little experiment with the action plans. So if you're able to put into the chat room any reflections and results, any aha moments, anything you've noticed from putting into practice what we've been discussing, then that would be really good, and we'll keep coming back to that as we go through. So particularly this time, we're going to be thinking about leadership secrets for contact centre managers. So this is covering a range of things, but it's really about you this week. So you as a person, you in terms of your strengths and your areas of opportunity, and just some little tools and tips and tricks that will help you to be the best contact centre manager that you can be. So again, if you've got any questions on this topic as we're going through, then put them into the chat room and I will do my best to answer them. So I'll just go through the objectives and exactly what we're going to be covering in this session. So there's a number of key things. So my first kind of question for you is going to be around what people really think of your leadership. So if you've had any feedback on your leadership to date, then it would be great for you to kind of have that in the back of your mind when we're going through this. Because what's really key is for you to be able to spot and solve your own blind sides. Because we've all got strengths and we've all got areas of opportunity, but are we aware of what those are? So sometimes if you're not particularly confident, then you might not fully appreciate what your strengths are. But equally, at times, we can all be guilty of not always knowing what our weaknesses and blind sides can be. And it's only when we know about them that we can begin to start to do something with it. So that's where it's really important to find out what people really think of your leadership and to get some feedback so that you can reflect on that. We don't know what we don't know, so somebody has to tell us, which is why feedback is a gift. So why your credibility is so important, we're going to cover that. We're going to think about your reputation in the organisation and where that comes from and what's the formula that you need to know to create and maintain it, because that's absolutely key when you start working in leadership and management. We're going to go through some things that you need to be able to know in order to successfully lead absolutely anyone at any time in anything. So there's a little tool I'm going to give you to help with that. And we're going to go over the biggest fallacy in leadership and parenting that you must avoid. So it'd be good to also know in the chat room who's parents and who's not, because if you are parents, then quite a lot of the skills you've developed you probably use in contact centre leadership from time to time as well, because we do see some good behaviours and some bad behaviours. So it's how you deal with that that's key. So any thoughts or reflections in the chat room so far before we kind of really get our teeth stuck into this content?
We haven't. I think everyone's waiting to find out how your leadership secrets.
Okay. Well, the first thing that we're really going to get into is 360 feedback. So I don't know if you've had this opportunity to have a 360 feedback questionnaire done for you in your organisation. So again, you can put in the chat room yes or no. That's a really easy one. If you've had 360 feedback, what have you done with it? So for those of you who haven't or you've not come across it before, then obviously if you think about 360, it's about getting feedback all the way around yourself. So we get feedback from below, the team that you lead and manage, your peers at the same level as you, and from your leaders, so the people you report into. So you're getting a full range view of your performance. And it's all done anonymously through usually an online system, which means that we're gathering some really kind of sensitive information sometimes that people won't necessarily want to say to your face. So we can get some stuff out of doing a 360, which is really powerful, which we wouldn't otherwise uncover. And it means that you can then digest that information in a way that's safe for you too, because you're not being told to your face and all the usual defensive reactions and things that as humans we're programmed to do. So it's very much a learning process. So if you've had this done for you in the past, then it might be a good time now to think about in your action plan for the coming week, going back to that report and going through it. If you've never had one before and you think, well, that's really interesting, but you know, I haven't got that opportunity to necessarily do it, you could set yourself up a survey monkey and you could just pick some questions to ask yourself and send that out to your colleagues and to your team and ask them for some feedback. And that's certainly one way in which you could do that. So has anybody had that process done before? Can we see any thoughts on that?
No, but Jonty's replied and said about is anyone a parent on the call? I have 2 teenage children. I find it easier to lead a team than it is to lead a family. Herding chickens is a term that comes to mind.
Oh, brilliant. Yes, absolutely. And you know, I don't know whether it's easier to have girls than it is to have boys. I don't know. I've got one of each, and they're not at the teenage stage yet. But this when we get to this section at the end, it's certainly kind of quite Super Nanny-ish. If you remember Jo Frost and the TV series Super Nanny, I learned a lot about leadership and parenting from watching her. So here are some questions, if you've not got the opportunity to do 360, that you could ask it either through SurveyMonkey or face-to-face in a one-to-one. And the only risk with when you do this in a one-to-one situation is that if I manage you and I ask you, you know, what could I do even better, or what's the one thing that I do that you don't like, or, you know, whatever question I ask you, it puts you on the spot a little bit, and I'm your manager, so that's also a bit of a dynamic. Have you know, is it going to come back against you if you're really honest, even though I'm asking you? So the process of doing it anonymously in writing through a system and not having that face-to-face is where we often get better results. But
we've had we've had some feedback on 360 feedback. Kelly said, yes, we do appraisals every 6 months, and we have done a very lengthy questionnaire in the contact centre asking about every single aspect of the role and management. Caroline says we have our HR team getting manager feedback for our annual reviews. And Jonty said 360-degree feedback is a great technique. It gives really good feedback. It takes you outside your comfort zone to ask for some of the feedback, particularly from peers.
Yeah, it's really powerful. I put a group of 30 managers through it in a contact centre recently, and 100% of them said afterwards that they had changed something about their behaviour based on that 360 feedback. And that it was a very useful exercise to do. So what we did for them was constructed 40 questions that were built around the competencies that organisation had in its managerial competency structure. So under communication, there were maybe kind of 4 or 5 questions, things like, you know, does Carolyn listen actively? Does she get defensive in meetings? Or is she open? You know, so there's a list of questions. And people answer then on a scale of usually kind of 1 to 7 around how likely or not likely I am to exhibit those behaviours. And then that's all put into percentage scores and split by groupings. So I could see that maybe I don't get defensive with my team, but maybe I do get defensive with my peers. So, you know, so what's that about? And I can start to think that actually maybe I've got more sympathy for my team and I'm more patient with them, and with my peers I get a bit, oh come on, you should know this by now. And so by having that 360 feedback, it's a really kind of good opportunity to see things that might kind of impact my performance that maybe I wasn't even aware I was even really doing, or maybe I knew I did them but it didn't realise the impact perhaps it was having on some of my less confident peers or whatever.
Yeah, Roxanne said that she'd had 360 and feedback and found it really valuable as long as people are open and honest in the feedback. I mean, how would you suggest getting around that?
So we put a number of guidelines in place before we would run a 360 exercise, so that first of all the people who are invited to participate and provide feedback are reassured that all their information is kept anonymously and it's kept externally by us. It doesn't even go into kind of the company's HR department. And that even if a manager could identify who they were based on a comment they made, because it's sometimes recognisable from the style of writing or the words they use or the example that they give, they're reassured that the manager has agreed not to kind of have any recompense against them by the fact that they go, oh well, I think that Rachel wrote that, so now I'm going to come and confront you about it. They absolutely would be severely reprimanded if they did that, because by signing up to that process they've agreed that that information is just going to be for their own personal development. So that's the best reassurance that we can give, really, and just making people feel that this is an opportunity and either you're going to take it or you're not, and it could be years before you get this opportunity again. So most times we find that people are pretty good with it. We will also force them to make comments if they leave a low score, so anything scoring 3 or below, they have to put something in the comment box to explain why they've said what they've said. And actually a lot of the more useful information comes from the anecdotal comments rather than just the numbers. So that's good. But there's all sorts of clever things you can do with the data, kind of top 5 strengths, top 5 areas of opportunity. You can also, if you put a group of managers through that process together, you can then benchmark what's the average for the contact centre manager peer group, and then position where you are either above, below or the same as your peers, which can be quite helpful for kind of that little bit of competitiveness and making sure that you're keeping up with your peers, or are you out in front or are you getting left behind. So that can be quite helpful as well. So yeah, I totally recommend this process, but it does cost money, and it does take time. You have to obviously put in several weeks usually of time for people to fill out all these questionnaires, and if you put in a group of managers through together and they're all inviting 15 or 20 people each, you can imagine how many surveys have to be filled in and how long that takes. And then we would always sit down and go through that feedback together face to face with one of our coaches, so that the person isn't just given a report that says we all hate you and now you've got to sit in a room and read this on your own, because that's awful. No one would want that. Not that they ever do say we all hate you, but sometimes there are things in it that make people cry. If I go in to do 360 feedback, I always have tissues in my bag, because I've just done it so many times when people have cried because they've got a bit of a wake-up call or somebody said something and it has kind of impacted them. But from that down point can come some fantastic behavioural change and some real strong personal development. So I've seen people then just absolutely have a word with themselves and push through to a whole other level. But if they'd never got that information, they would have carried on oblivious because no one had ever said it to them before.
Yeah, a few people in our chat room have said they've kind of got the feedback, and Jonty said he's used it to try and improve his listening skills. Kelly said she's always implemented the changes. Roxanne's asked, any recommendations as to what organisations to use to run 360?
Well, we do them at Real Results, so there you go. So I can share some sample questions and stuff. We can chat about that in the chat room at the end, if that's helpful. But the quality of the questions is really key, and they should be bespoke to your organisation ideally, and what you are looking to develop as managerial competence in your organisation. So yeah, but here's a set of questions that you could use in a one-to-one with your advisors. So, you know, get into the habit of doing this and you're less likely to have them come back going, oh no, everything's fine because you put me on the spot and I'm not used to this and I'm too scared to tell you what I really think. So if you ask these sorts of questions all the time, then people become more used to it, and when they realise that they can answer that freely and openly and honestly without fear of retribution, then you can start to get some really good data without going through any kind of formal or expensive process. So things like, is there anything I can do better for you? Also, is there anything you'd like me to do more? Or is there anything you'd like to do less? Or anything you'd like me to do differently? That's another really good question to ask. But if you notice the way that we write these questions, we're going to try and make it specific for them to answer. So things like, what is the biggest frustration for you in your role? So I'm not just asking, is there anything frustrating you right now? With that question, I'm asking, what is the biggest frustration for you in your role? So even if it is only quite a small thing, you know, that's the thing that stands out for me when you ask that question. And how can I help and support you further? So even though I might be already, you feel, helping and supporting you, how could I help and support you even more, even further? That, for me, makes me think, you know, you're open to stretch. So we're not talking about these questions necessarily being negative. We just want to open up some conversation and some dialogue. So these are good questions to ask your team, and if you've got other questions that you use, that you ask them, then again share those in the chat room, because it's not an exhaustive list, it's just to get the juices flowing and the ball rolling, really, that one. Okay, so another tool that you can use for 360, and I've put this in your workbooks, is this Thrive model. So what you can do with that is you can basically print that out and photocopy it, whatever, give it to your advisor and say, okay, we're going to sit down and we're going to have a one-to-one next week or whatever, and I would like you to fill out this chart. And basically what I'm asking you to do is to score how you feel in each of these areas. So how competent do you feel to do your job? Yeah, so if you think that on a scale of 1 to 10, it's somewhere between 1 and 4, you'd put it across in that red box. If you think medium in terms of your competency level, you put it across in that amber box, and high, 8 to 10, in the green. And you're going to do that on all these C's. So you've got competent, confident, comfortable, challenged, cared for by me as your manager, and the organisation. Control, so how empowered and how much control do you feel you've got over your work. And clarity, how clear are you about what you're doing and the purpose and the bigger picture and all that. So what that then does is you give the advisor that model, you also fill it out for what you think for that advisor, and then you come together and you compare notes. So imagine, Rachel, if you're in my team and I think that I'm caring for you on the green band of 8 to 10, I think that I give you loads of attention and coaching and support, but from your side you feel like actually it's low or medium, then when we come together and we compare notes, we can have a conversation about that. So the real interesting thing with this model is where mismatch occurs, because that's where we want to be zooming in and having a conversation. If I think that you aren't competent, so I've scored you red, and you think you really are and you're green, then we need to be having a conversation about that. If you think that the environment is really, really challenging you, but I think it isn't, I think you've got more potential and you could do more, then again it would show up with this tool and we could have a conversation about it. So this is a great one for a bit of 360 feedback. So, you know, if you're saying, actually I don't feel cared for, you never asked me what I did at the weekend and you don't remember little details that I've told you about my life outside of work, but I think I'm really caring for you because I'm putting you on loads of training courses, then we're going to be able to have a conversation about what's important to each other. And actually, the advisor is always right in this situation, because this is about really getting their perspective. So if I know that actually it's more important for you if I ask you how you got on in your XYZ activity at the weekend than it is for you to go on the next technical training course, that's going to keep you happier at work and more engaged than going on really expensive training. That's quite easy for me to fix. But if we don't have that conversation, if we didn't use this model, we might never find that out. So I've used this model quite a lot in coaching courses, training courses that we use. We give it to our delegates to take away and use to really open up coaching conversations. But again, as part of an extra 360 toolkit, it's really useful. So any questions, reflections on the Thrive model?
No, not at the moment.
I also call it the 7 C's as well, because it's got these, as you can see, these 7 C's in it, and I think it just works quite well because you can almost remember these words a lot more easily for the fact that they all start with the letter C. But these are things that time and time again come out as what impacts staff engagement. So, staff will say, I need to feel cared for, I need to feel like I have an element of control over my work, I need to feel challenged, but I also need to feel comfortable in the environment that I'm in, that the culture isn't a blame culture trying to catch me out. So all these C's are really key for staff engagement.
Yeah, Kelly's just written, looks good, I'm going to give this a go.
Excellent.
So you said it was in the booklet. So.
Yeah. So you will also get a copy of the slides as well. So whichever format is easier for you to run off, then just do that. So what we're going to do now is a bit of a personality exercise. So I need everybody to have a pen to hand and a piece of paper, or you can do this in the booklet if you've printed the booklet off. And all I'm going to ask you to do is to sign your name in that booklet. There's no blank checks for call centre helper underneath the paper, so nothing untoward, just for you to do that. And actually it'd be really good to know who's right-handed in the group and who's left-handed.
I'm right-handed. I've got my nice real results pen.
Oh, excellent.
Always use.
Excellent. So if you just do that, and you sign your name, and you just do it how you would normally do it, and then swap the pen over into your other hand, so your non-preferred hand, and do it again.
Oh dear. We've got a lot of right-handed people in the chat room. Okay. Kelly and Alistair. Oh, and Roxanne are all right-handed.
Okay.
Oh, my handwriting is definitely not brilliant with my left hand.
Okay.
Caroline's just said right-handed as well.
Yeah, I'm right-handed too, so yeah, there's quite a lot of us. Normally we have one in 10 or something, I think, that's left. So
Holly said right. Okay. We'll see if we've got any lefties on board.
So by now then, the majority of you should have swapped the pen over into your left hand and written your name again. So it would be also good for you to think about, if you've done that exercise, what was the difference between the two? So what did it feel like when you did it with your preferred hand, and then what did it feel like when you did it with your non-preferred hand? So what are the differences, and how do you feel about the result as well?
I'm not sure I'd sign any checks with my left hand.
No, I did actually break my right arm once, and I had to use my left, and I just kind of did, and it got better over the 6 weeks, kind of what I could do with my left hand. But as soon as the plaster cast came off, I didn't carry on using my left. I went back to using my right. And the reason that I want us to think about that is because this is about how you instinctively respond to people management as a leader. So it's almost like if you're right-handed, you have this kind of set of patterns of behaviours that come really naturally. You'll pick your mug up probably with your right hand, first and foremost. And actually what we're trying to get you to do through this leadership development is to think about expanding your range of movement and your skill. So that means being able to use your non-preferred hand. Yeah, so Kelly's saying, yeah. confident, but then not as confident the other way. And that's exactly what it's like with people management. So the way that you are programmed for who you are and your personality means that operating in your world feels like this. But actually, when you get 360 feedback, or you've come across a situation where what you've instinctively done hasn't worked, we need to be able to expand this other range of movement, this different stuff, and that's going to feel weird. It's going to feel uncomfortable, and it's not going to feel like you. And that's what it feels like between writing the two different things. So most people go, when I wrote with my preferred hand, it's automatic, it's kind of really natural, it's instinctive. But when I did it this way, it was clumsy and awkward, it took twice as long, I had to really stop and think about what I was doing. And that's what we've got to bring into our leadership, because if we continually go with just what's easy and what comes naturally to you, your range of skill as a leader will always kind of be quite narrow, and you will work really well with the people who are similar to you, but you're going to kind of miss out on all this opportunity on this non-preferred skill-based side here. So that's why it was important for us to do that activity. And what this leads us now to thinking about is particularly what we're looking at with this model of personality is the Myers-Briggs type indicator, is about understanding where your strengths lie. So there are 4 dichotomies in Myers-Briggs. We're not going to have time to go through all of them today, and if you've done this Myers-Briggs before, you will probably already know what your 4-letter code is, and that's great. And again, I would encourage you to go back and reread your report from that and think about how that impacts your leadership behaviours and your performance. So we're going to focus on a couple of ones really in this session, and one of the most dominant things to think about is the extroversion-introversion dichotomy. So that's about where you get your energy from. And then we'll move on and we'll have a look at the judging and perceiving dichotomy, which is about the kind of lifestyle that you prefer, how you like to live your life. The 2 in the middle, just for reference, sensing and intuition, that's about how you like to take in information. So sensing is quite detailed, whereas intuition is more kind of big picture. And then thinking and feeling is about decision making. So do you make decisions with your head or your heart? Now those will also impact quite significantly your personality, your leadership style, your performance. So you can keep that in mind as we're going through, but particularly for this session, let's just look at extroversion, introversion, and judging and perceiving. And the words are a bit weird, don't worry too much about the words, quite old-fashioned. This is based on Carl Jung's work in the 1800s, and so don't always make a lot of sense. But how you're energized, basically it means external or internal. So if you're extroverted, it's not that you're a big party animal, and if you're introverted, you're the shy wallflower. It's just about how your batteries get charged. Do your batteries get charged through solar power externally, or do they have to be plugged into a power source and you have to sit quietly in the corner while your batteries kind of charge up? But at the end of it, you're both equally energized, and you can both be as lively or as quiet as each other in different situations, but it's just about where that comes from. So what brings your energy up and what brings it down? Because if you remember when we did the session in week 1, we talked about there's quite often that advisor that when they walk over to you, your energy goes, oh God, here we go again, half an hour of my life I'm going to lose. Now, if you're introverted, that is even more significant probably for you, because that conversation pulls the energy out of you. And extroverts naturally are talkers, so they prefer to think out loud and talk through problems. They like to have discussions, and actually they could do sometimes to stop talking and do a bit more thinking. Whereas our introverts, they need to sometimes step up and speak kind of more than they currently do. But when they do it, they're very good at and just as good at doing it when they do it, but it takes energy from them. So if they can sometimes get away with not doing, they will. So if you ever find that you're in a meeting and somebody says something and you think, that's what I was going to say, but I didn't get round to it, and now they've taken all the glory from it, then that's a really clear sign of being introverted, because introverts think things through really well before it comes out of the mouth, which is the opposite of extroverts. But what that can do is it means they put a lot of pressure sometimes on themselves to be absolutely perfect when it actually is released and they've thought through. They're never insensitive, they've always thought it all through, but sometimes then the moment has passed and they've missed it. So this is really important for you to think about as a leader, and particularly in a contact centre environment, because I think contact centre environments attract quite a lot of extroverts by the very nature of the fact they're talking all day on the phone to customers. So people who are drawn to doing that job and who can cope in the long term doing that job quite often are extroverted. But that doesn't mean that when the introverts can't do it and that they can do it equally beautifully, but then when they go home they're just cabbaged, and they can't speak they can't speak to anyone else for the rest of the night, and they just want to watch TV and be mute. Whereas extroverts could speak all day on the phone and then still want to go out and meet their mates in the pub or speak to their mum on the phone for an hour and a half, and just all their waking time is spent kind of doing that. Now I'm talking here about the very clear ends of the dichotomies, so that people can get a good feel for that and they can say, yeah, I feel more like one or the other. But remember, you could be anywhere on that scale, and you could be quite close to the middle. But if you take the Myers-Briggs questionnaire, it will always push you out 1%, kind of either one side or the other, depending on how you answer the questions. But it's something that I think you need to know about yourself in order to be self-aware and to understand why you might get on with certain people in your team and find other people a real drain on you. Because equally, if you're extroverted and you've got somebody in your team who's quite quiet, that can feel like pulling teeth sometimes. And extroverted managers can then be banging their heads against a brick wall because they want them to open up and talk to them, but it's not happening. And that's not your fault and it's not their fault. It's just understanding what's going on here in terms of personality and thinking, actually, maybe I have to be comfortable with silence in order to get them to open up, because they need thinking time. And actually me bombarding them with brilliant open questions isn't working. But as an extrovert, I'm not always comfortable with silence. In fact, I'm not comfortable with it at all. So, I give them 30 seconds, and if they don't answer, I ask the question again another way. And that's not working for them because they've not got thinking time, so they just don't end up saying anything. They just sit back and let you kind of steamroller away with it. But if we just both sit there in silence after a few minutes, quite possibly, they might start to open up to you. So it's allowing you to kind of flex and try out some different things with your approach. So is there any thoughts, reflections, questions on that before we move on looking at J and P?
I think move on.
Okay. So these words are weird, judging and perceiving, so don't read anything into them at all, but these are about the lifestyle that you prefer. So J is very organised, so they like to get things decided, they like to be scheduled and planned, and they don't like last minute pressure and rushing around, and they get satisfaction from getting things done. Now, I've got a secret bet here that I think Jonty Pierce is on the J side, so it'd be good to know afterwards, because I've never met anybody more organised and methodical kind of in their prep and planning than Jonty. Is great. Whereas if you look at what the other side is, it's kind of quite free and spontaneous, it's fly by the seat of the pants kind of last minute stuff is where they get their best energy, and really resourceful and adaptable, but quite scary sometimes to work with because they are kind of quite last minute, whereas obviously the P's like to have things done and boxed off and done far in advance. So best way I can kind of share this with you is through a couple of pictures. So this is a picture, if you can see it, about how J's might approach a project. So there is a goal to get to, And the J person starts that and they take logical steps. You can see that it's just kind of neat and tidy. We do a bit, a bit, a bit, a bit, and we finish in advance of our goal. So that works, beautifully across the timeline at the bottom. It's just step by step. When we look at the P type, so the perceiving type and how they might approach the project, it's somewhat different. So they will not start something really seriously until they absolutely have to. So the kind of deadline is approaching, and when it's right in their face, they go, oh, okay, yeah, we might as well get on with this. And then there's this kind of crazy, frantic activity, and they kind of arrive at the goal. They still achieve it, but you can see that that kind of squiggly mess for a J is just horrible. Like, why would you do that to yourself? That's just awful. But with a P, that's fun. That's like the best way to do it for them, because they can't get motivated to do it in that neat and tidy step-by-step way. And also, if we think about that neat and tidy step-by-step way, if you imagine that maybe halfway down that timeline the goal moved, it became a different goal, and so actually all that work that you've then done as a J is now worth nothing. You've wasted all that time and effort and energy. Whereas when you're a P, if the goal moves halfway down that timeline, it doesn't matter, because I've barely even started anyway. I haven't really given it any thought, so whatever. So that's why we quite often see Js will freak out a lot more over change, whereas Ps are just like, yeah, okay, no problem, just move it along a different route, because it's not impacting them. So they come across as, quite laid back and flexible and adaptable, but it's only really because they haven't done anything yet anyway. Whereas J's like, you can't possibly do that because I've got all these beautiful color-coded files where I've done all this work. So it's different. So again, both have got strengths, both have got blind sides, and it's about being clear about which is you, and what does that bring to your leadership and management style. Okay, so if you think about this in relation to one-to-ones, for example, and you're a P, and something comes up, and actually you're going to reschedule everyone's one-to-ones today because there's been some kind of crisis, and we're going to do that, we're going to sort it out. So you go and tell your team, sorry about that, but we're going to do your one-to-ones next week. And the P's in your team go, yeah, whatever, no worries. The J's are like, well, hang on a minute, I've done all my pre-one-to-one preparation, and I've got childcare sorted, and I've done all this stuff, and now you're just changing it. So it's about understanding the dynamics between you and your team. And if you've got people that it bothers them when you do that because they were all mentally geared up for it, then maybe actually I'm still going to do those 2 or 3 people that day, and then my Ps that are not so bothered will do next week. So it just starts to give you a little bit more awareness, a little bit more flexibility, and not to treat everybody kind of identically, because everybody is different. So you can have kind of that little bit more intelligence in your leadership approach. And when it comes to the approach you take with your team, this is where I want to just think about the link with credibility, because the formula for personal credibility is your words plus your actions plus your reputation come together to form your personal credibility. So if I consistently am disorganized as a manager because I'm a P type and I'm last minute, and I consistently reschedule one-to-ones, I'm going to get that reputation. And if, because of my personality, I don't think that's a big deal, then that comes across in my words, my body language, and of course I'm going to get this reputation then perhaps as being either a bit sloppy or a bit too laid back or a bit insensitive to other people's needs. And if I don't have that kind of awareness myself, I probably am not even connecting that with my reputation and my personal credibility. And even if I did, I'm not necessarily understanding what's wrong with that either. So this kind of fits with personality, and it fits with 360. And so these are kind of secrets of contact center leadership, because you have to go looking for these as well for yourself. You have to find out, what do people really think about me from my reputation? What's going on in terms of the messages and the signals that I'm sending out because of the way my personality drives me in my behaviour, and that comes out in my words and my actions. So it's quite important for us to start to pull all of this together.
Yeah, we've had a few people in the chat room who've been sharing whether they're a P or a J. Junty obviously said, I love to be scheduled and organised.
Yeah.
Kelly says she's a J, and Roxanne says, I'm definitely a J. However, if I feel disengaged and unmotivated in the subject, then I become a P.
Okay, that's called inferior function. So what happens under stress and pressure is that we go to our inferior functions. So that's where, if you kind of think about an extroverted person and they're really loud and bubbly and blah blah, but then when they're unhappy, they're really quiet and withdrawn. So you know that something's wrong. That's their inferior function. You kind of go to the opposite a lot of the time. So somebody who is very non-emotional, so maybe they're the thinking type, if they suddenly start crying, it's like, oh my goodness, that is so not them, it's really bad. And that's called the inferior function in the personality. So it's like this skeleton that comes out the closet and goes running around, we're having a meltdown, and you've got to try and get the skeleton back in the box. So the more you know about yourself and your personality and what can cause you to trigger your inferior function, but if you can develop your inferior function to be less inferior, so that's your ambidextrous right and left stuff, then that's going to give you kind of more control over your inferior function, and it's not going to come screaming out the closet and give you a meltdown day at work, where you go and lock yourself in the car or the toilet and cry, because they're not good for your personal credibility. And I hope kind of none of your managing directors are ever seen doing that, because there's no coming back from that. Right, here's a question for the chat room. So what things do you think contact centre managers need to know to successfully lead anyone at any time? Because I've got a few tricks up my sleeve that I think you have to know these things in order for this to happen. And it comes in a format of a tool that I'm going to share with you. But it'd be good to get your thoughts as a team about what you think from your experiences you have to know. Because there's things you have to know about the individuals that you lead and manage.
I think we've got Roxanne typing something at the moment. So
what we don't want to do is provide kind of a blanket approach. I talk a lot about two things in leadership that are really important. So being authentic, we touched on that last time. So being really self-aware about your personality, what drives you, who you are as an individual. So that's you. But that you're also consistent in who you are. So whether you're tired or you're having a bad day or you've got personal stuff going on, you're still consistent in your authenticity of who you are. So when that skeleton comes out of the closet, it's not consistent with who you are, and that freaks everybody out, and we don't know what to do with that. Equally, as a manager, if your behaviour changes because you're tired or hungover or moody or stresses other things in your personal life, then again, people don't know how to deal with that. So it's really important to be a good manager to be authentic and consistent in you. However, it is really key, and I just touched on this, about your ability to have a good range of movement in your leadership toolbox, and to be able to choose different tools for different people at different times. So that's not being inconsistent, because you're still consistent in your personality and behaviour from you, but this is about you having good tools and range of tools to have flexibility as a leader with everybody else. So yeah.
Roxanne said their people, their personal preferences and learning styles. How can a leader adapt their style to work best for that individual?
Excellent.
She said, I also think you need to be clear, consistent on your exceptions standards, so your team know what to expect from you in return.
Yeah, perfect. We can finish early because that's a lot about what I was going to cover. So yeah, fabulous. So one of the tools that I want to give you to help with exactly that is this one. It's called Situational Leadership. I've put this in the printout booklets as well. So you can definitely start to see that you need to change your leadership style depending on the competence of the person and the commitment. So we've touched on competence and commitment before when we've talked about rocks and monkeys and things. But this is a slightly different model. We call it D1, D2, D3, D4. It's task situational, this. So if somebody is D1, they've got low competence and high commitment. So for me, that's your enthusiastic beginner. And I liken this to the Karate Kid. If ever you've watched the proper Karate Kid, not the one with Will Smith's kid in it, the proper original Karate Kid, right? So he says, paint the fence and wax on, wax off on the cars. And the kid does it all day and all night, and he's absolutely exhausted. And he's got really high commitment, but he's got low competence when it comes to karate. And so what that kind of style is as a leader, this S1 box that you can see here that says directing, that's wax on, wax off, yeah, paint the fence, yeah, up and down. And I'm telling you that's what you're doing. I'm directing you. I'm not giving you choices. I'm not giving you coaching and saying, well, how do you think you should wax on, wax off? I'm telling you that's how you do it. So when somebody is a new starter, that's what they need. And it's okay to be directional. And this is a bit of a kind of secret of contact center leadership, because some people go, well, I thought I was always supposed to ask. What do you think? Because we do all this great coaching training. What do you think? And actually, when you ask a new starter, they don't think, they don't know, they don't have any frame of reference, and all you're doing is making them feel stupid for the fact of keep asking them what do they think they should do. So it's absolutely right to go down that kind of directing route. Then as they start to get more competent, so we can actually put together our wax on, wax off and paint the fence, I can see I've got some moves here, but actually my commitment's starting to drop because I'm sick of painting your fence and I'm sick of waxing your cars and I don't want to do it anymore. Then this is where coaching does come in. And actually you start to give me some praise and some reinforcement and say, yeah, come on, Carolyn, you can see it's all starting to fit together. You're better than you think you are now. And that will carry me through to the next stage. So in the next stage, I'm D3. I've got moderate to high competence now. But you know what? My commitment can still come and go. And then this always reminds me of when I learned to drive. And if you've had this experience, you'll know, like maybe you've started to be able to drive down the street without stalling the car, and you've been able to maybe, get the hang of changing the gears without crunching them so hard. But when you get to this stage, this is like, your hill starts and your 3-point turns and your parallel parking. And actually, my commitment is still, my confidence isn't quite there yet. And this is still a bit of a dodgy area for me, even though in the rest of it, I'm now starting to get some really good skills. So this is where quite a lot of the time people will give up in the contact centre. They'll leave, they'll drop out because they go, I can't break through that final barrier and I'm kind of tired now and the novelty's worn off and I've had enough. So at this point, supporting is really important. So that's even more praise, showing them and reminding them how far they've gone with it. Do you remember 6 weeks ago when you couldn't even do a change of gear without crunching the car? Reminding them of that, because you forget, you just think, oh, that's become part of your writing your name, with your right hand. You don't even think about it. And then the final stage is the delegation stage. So as a manager, this is really key for you now to look at the people in your team and think, who have I got who's high competence and high commitment in certain tasks that have to be done, because I can delegate to them with very little input. And in the film of the Karate Kid, this is where at the competition at the end, he does his own kind of movement and he kind of decides to stand up and do this flying kick and he wins. Mr. Miyagi didn't tell him to do that. He decided to do it himself. And when you've got people, these are your stars in that delegating box, that's you've cracked a lot of your leadership formula there, because you don't have to put in loads of time and energy into that. So that's really helpful. But actually, there will be some skills that me as an advisor I can do in a delegated way, but other things that you might still have to direct me with. I can't change the tyre on my car. I can't do it. So if you want me to come and speak at a conference next week on agent empowerment, you can just drop me in there with very little notice and I can do it. But if you say, I want you to go and change the tyre on my car, I couldn't. So there are certain tasks you could delegate to me and certain things that you would need to tell me, jack the car up like this, remove the wheel nuts like this, because I wouldn't know what to do. So this isn't about rock stars and monkeys and personality. This is task specific, which is why it's called situational leadership. And this should tie in with your skills matrix, and it should enable you as a leader to be quite flexible in the style that you're giving. So for each of your staff, think about whether they're D1 to D4 in different things, and therefore what style of leadership do they need from you. Because if you get this wrong, this is when we start to either scare away our new starters or people who are picking up new skills, because we go, oh yeah, you're really good at being an advisor, so you'll make a great team manager. Off you go. Well, now I'm brand new actually as a team manager. I've gone right back to D1 when it comes to being a manager. I'm a D4 when it comes to talking to customers on the phone. And you can delegate to me, but if you put me into a managerial role and delegate to me, I'm going to crash and burn really, because I need you to take me through that cycle while I'm learning. So I think this is a trick quite often that gets missed that's really important. So if you're interested in situational leadership, it's by a guy called Ken Blanchard, and you can certainly look that up and you can do some more reading on that. And he's written lots of leadership and management books that are all very good. So my last question for you for today is, what is the biggest fallacy in leadership? And then this also applies into parenting. So if you have any guesses that you would like to put into the chat room, then now is the time to do them. And we have touched on this now as we've gone through the session. I've certainly said this word today, so you might already have an idea where this is going.
I know we had a few parents or a few people on the chat room who said they were parents, so we'll see what they say as well.
Yeah. I think as well, when you're a parent, probably when you have one child is different to when you have two or when you have three. There's a saying that, kind of your standards sort of relax. Kind of the more kids you have, it's more just about survival in the end when you start to be outnumbered, I think, than when you start at the beginning you expect everything to be perfect. But yeah, this is definitely something to watch out for, and and you might have your own ideas on this as well. It's not that we're going to shoot you if you get it wrong, but for me it's about inconsistency. That's the key thing. So if you think about, if you've ever watched Super Nanny and Jo Frost, quite often she goes in to kind of rescue families where the kid is keeping them up all night, and all she will do for the first few days is keep putting the kid back in bed. Just keep putting them back in bed, or keep putting them back on the naughty spot over and over and over and over and over and over again, because in the past there's been no consistency. So the kid hasn't known what to expect. Parents have tried to do that and then given up and gone, oh, do you know what, for an easy life, we're just not going to stick with this today. And that's what is at the root of 99% of the problems that I've seen on her show. And it got me thinking about what happens with people problems in contact centres. And it's not just inconsistency from one day to the next from me as a manager, but it's also inconsistency across the whole floor in how different managers deal with things. So for me, inconsistency is something that we have to tackle as a peer group of managers, and say, right, these are going to be kind of our ground rules that we're all going to support each other with, because otherwise, you know, the manager who's got the feeling side of the Myers-Briggs might find that they find it difficult to say no to somebody, whereas someone with a thinking preference can detach themselves and say no. So if I'm a manipulative agent, whose team do you think I want to be on? Yeah, I'm going to go for the softer manager, aren't I? Yeah. So quite often, what we'll find then is if you're a nice kind of warm person and very caring, you're going to end up with all the monkeys on your team if you're not careful, because they work it out and they're drawn to you like moths to a candle, and they want to come and work on your team, and they're going to really challenge your assertiveness, and they're going to kind of suck all that positive energy out of you and take advantage. So it's about working together as a peer group. It's also about you thinking some of the things we said already, making sure that you're not different from day to day depending on how you're feeling, that you can kind of park some of your other stuff at the door and kind of get into the zone of what you want to be as a leader. So go back to that credibility formula and think, what is it that I want to be known for? So when I do next have a 360 feedback exercise, what would I want people to be saying about me in that report? And then keep working towards that. And whenever you feel like you might be slipping, that you can do some self-coaching and think, you know, what is the one thing that is going to make me slip, and how can I prepare for that? And for me personally, quite often it's just tiredness, or if I'm hungry, I'm going to be more snappy. And again, these are fallacies in parenting as well. So they always say, you know, if you're not getting your sleep, or you're not getting the right food at the right times, you're not going to be the parent that you want to be. And equally, you're not going to be the leader who you want to be. So for people to really see you at your best, what has got to happen for you? So just to be watching out for the traps of inconsistency. So that's kind of bringing us to the end of all the content for today. And I've got an action plan for you to carry out for your week 3. So the first element of that is that it's about you seeking some 360 feedback. So if you've got this in the past, go back to it. If you've never done it before, then either think about it as an exercise for your company, or just think about some ad hoc ways in which you can gather some of that, either little survey monkeys or kind of questions to your team, so that you can evaluate your own strengths and you can think about your blind sides, because we've all got them and we need other people to help us in order to see them. That's why they're called blind sides. Consider the impact of the words, actions and reputation on your personal credibility. So what is it that you want to be known for, and is that matching up to what you're currently known for? Or if you go, I don't even know, you know, if you had to describe me in 3 words, what would they be? And if you don't know what people would say about you, then this is a great opportunity. Use that Thrive model that we've gone through today and see if you're aligned with your team members on all those 7 C's. Think about how you can flex your leadership style, so across different situations, to suit different individuals at different tasks. So those are the 4 things you need to know to be able to lead anyone at any time to do anything. What's their competence and what's their commitment? And therefore I can think about whether I need to be directing, coaching, supporting or delegating. And then the last one is to really be aware of any inconsistencies in your behaviour or your decision making, depending on how you're feeling or who it is that's asking. That's the worst. So just step back sometimes, and it's okay to say, I need to think about it, I'll come back to you, rather than being put on the spot.
Fab. Okay. So we've reached nearly the top of the hour, but just to remind everyone that next week we're on Tuesday, the 9th of February. Carolyn, what are we covering next week?
That's a very good question. What are we on next week?
I think it's call and contact centre management
That's
skills.
it. Yeah, we're going to get more operational next week. We are going to be thinking more kind of around metrics and technology and that side of things next time. So we'll kind of have finished some of the softer stuff. We've done quite a lot of thinking soft stuff with advisors. Today we've done some soft stuff with you. And next week we're going to think more kind of industry operational stuff. Yeah.
Fab. You mentioned at the start about giving feedback. What were you wanting to get feedback on from everyone?
What was that then? I can't remember. What did I say?
I think it was relating to kind of the course content and if people
Oh,
wanted
that was it.
more learning.
Yeah, well, so remember when obviously we gave you a questionnaire at the start to say what did you want to get from the program, and some of you were saying things like I want to improve my confidence as a team manager. So I was wanting to find out, because we're at that halfway point now. Is that happening for you? So if you all think about what you said you wanted to get out of this program and give us any feedback, thoughts, reflections, is that starting to happen, or is there anything else that you need or want in the final couple of sessions? Then obviously I'll try and build that in for you as well.
Fab. So you can either, send it to us in a private message or email me. Everyone's got my email address. We're just making sure that we make sure you all get the best out of this as possible. Uh,
Yeah.
so that's it for today. Thank you very much for joining us.
Uh,
Thank you very much, Carolyn.
my pleasure as always. I'll stick around in the chat room and I will put some links in there as well for some 360 information. I think someone was asking about that before as well.
Fab. Okay, bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.